Good afternoon and welcome. Today's words of Torah are in memory of Devora Shifra Bat Mirul Le'ilui Nishmata Tehei Nishmata Tzura B'Tzora Chaim. We're wishing her family only nechama in this difficult time. Our words of Torah and our mitzvot should be done, should be an Ilui Nishama, Zechut for her and nechama for the family. Okay. We up to Perek Daled Mishnah Zayin. Chapter 4, Mishnah 7. I think there's some extra copies lying around, so she can have one as well. The Mishnah says as follows. Rabbi Yishmael Beno Omer. Who is Rabbi Yishmael Beno? Who are we referring to? Rabbi Yishmael is the son of the previous Mishnah, whose author was Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yishmael is the son of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi Omer. HaChosech atzmo min hadin, one who withholds himself or refrains min hadin from being a judge. Porek mimenu eva vegezel ushvuat shav. He unburdens himself, okay? He avoids eva, which is anger and hatred, gezel, stealing, ushvuat shav, and also baseless or false oaths, swearing for sheker. On the other hand, vehagas libo behora'ah, but someone who is, frivolous, he doesn't take it all that seriously. Gas libo, he's arrogant in his psak, in his ruling. Shoteh, rasha, vegas ruach. He's a fool, a wicked man, and an arrogant person. Now, let's first understand the Mishnah on its most straightforward and simplistic level. We're talking over here about a judge, okay? On the simple level, as I said. We're talking about a judge, and what Rabbi Yishmael is teaching us is that a judge who decides not to judge a court case, this person, he's stopping anger. Like, obviously, you have a judge and you ruled something in the court case. One of the sides might hate you, correct? The sides might hate each other, and maybe my ruling brought hatred into the hearts of these two people. So if I withhold myself from being a judge, I'm absolving myself of that responsibility. The second thing is gezel. Sometimes in a court case, you force people into a corner and they wind up stealing from one another. So as an example, God forbid, you see this all the time, in cases of divorce, people are threatening one another, using the kids as chips. If you don't give me this, if you don't give me the house, I'm going to tell them that you were abusive to the kids. I'm going to stop you from seeing them, on the weekends. They use the kids, and now what happens? The other person, either the wife or the husband, decides to lie to retain their money. I one time heard someone told me, he said, I have a court case, but I'm not worried. He said, why? He said, because if they tell me that I have to pay, then I'll tell them that the person owes me this other bill, which I have a contract for, that he owes me this money. He did pay me back, but actually he has no receipt. I never sent him a receipt. So I'll tell him that okay, fine, if I have to pay him, I'm going to offset it with this other money. He has no way of proving it, and I'm okay taking that money because anyway, he really does owe me this money. So if the judge rules against me, I'll lie over there and they won't be able to. And I'm sitting here listening to the abject horror that is today's court of law, and the abject horror that is this unfortunate reality that people call, a upstanding and truthful society. Shvuat shav, and many times a person in that case, he's forced to swear to uphold his false claims in a court. So you might cause him to swear that the money is his, and it's not actually true. So if a judge withholds himself from being the judge, then all these things, they might not happen to him. Now, the obvious first question we have to ask is, hold on a second. So if judge number one recuses themselves from the case, that doesn't stop stealing and lying and falsely swearing. It just stops stealing and lying and falsely swearing while you're the judge. There'll just be another judge, and then the same thing will play out. So what are we saying over here? HaChosech atzmo, he saves himself. Porek mimenu, and is that the job of a judge, to recuse themselves from ruling? Obviously, this is what you're supposed to do. So we'll come back to this in just a minute. Okay, finally, the flip side of the Mishnah on a simple level is telling us that when a person is arrogant with their judgment, they jump into judgment, they see things a certain way, and they decide, okay, this is the halacha. They didn't check the law, they didn't go over the court case with a fine-tooth comb. They want to come out with a law quickly, with a ruling quickly, because that fits their ego, like they always know what the right thing to do is. So in that case, the person, number one, is a shoteh, he's a dib, he's an idiot, because you know what? Maybe you're going to overlook some of the details of the case. I'll give you an example of this. Only recently, I had a young woman reach out to me. She said she was studying in class, and in class they're learning about, in the ethics class, and she wants to know what happens if there's no brain activity left in a body. Are you allowed to harvest the organs for someone else? So if someone is brain dead, are you allowed to harvest the organs? Welcome back. Are you allowed to harvest the organs for someone else? So I wrote back, it's extremely complicated, this case. There's a million different factors that, that swing the outcome. It's not something that I would answer, I said, but if you'd like to do some reading about the subject, here's an amazing article that talks about all the different opinions on such a weighty and important topic. She writes back, thank you very much, okay? I spoke to the school, I showed it to my teacher, and my teacher said, he would like to know, he said everyone should ask their shul rabbi for a ruling on the case. So I wrote back, I'm sorry, a ruling like this should not be put in front of a shul rabbi. It should be put in front of a rabbi who's an expert specifically in the laws of end of life and the ramifications. I said, this is not something that one just rules on and, throws rulings out into the ether without having very specific scenarios laid out and going to someone who's an expert in the field. Comes back again. The teacher said that we want to know what you think. I wrote in capital letters, I don't think, period. I ask, period. This is an example where on either side of the coin, you risk literally murder. If you pull the person off the machine too fast, you murdered them. If there was a chance to save the other person and you hesitated, you murdered the person who might get benefit from the heart transplant that could have saved their life. Therefore, I don't think, I ask. And I wonder what your teacher's fixation is on me as a shul rabbi being posek halacha on dinei nefashot. She says, I know, I also thought it was very weird. You have to know when you're in above your head. You have to know when the tiniest nuance in halacha actually invalidates your whole perspective on the issue. I'll give you an example. At this certain stage of brain death, there are some poskim that say a person is classified as if they are no longer alive. But there are many tests that they could potentially use to ascertain the status of the brain, some of which have a much greater propensity and possibility for error. So if you didn't know the difference and a doctor told you this is what the test showed, did you know to ask which test was administered? Did you know to ask what things needed to be tried? You understand? So a judge that it rushes to judgment, shoteh, he's an idiot because he thinks he knows everything. The biggest fool in the world is a fool that always thinks he's right. Right? The second element is rasha. He becomes someone who's wicked because he might have murdered the person by passing judgment too fast. And finally, of course, the root of his evil is gas ruach. So one of the things we've learned about previously already, when it comes to Pirke Abot, is to understand that really our job here is to widen the perspective a little bit, kind of perhaps further than the narrow field of focus that the Mishnah seems to be speaking about. This is not only an appeal to the Jewish judiciary asking them for a specific interpretation or approach to judgment. It speaks to every single person, every man, every woman, every child, in the way they approach and they judge the scenarios that life lays before them. There's an amazing story with the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai once gave a brilliant mashal. Certain people are very gifted in the mishalim that they use in order to teach. The Dubna Magid was very gifted in his piercing mishalim and how exact they were at conveying the wisdom that they were trying to achieve. But also the Ben Ish Chai had an unbelievable proclivity for just knocking them out the park. And he talked about this magnificent example. He says, you have a donkey. On Monday, the owner of this donkey decides he's going to take his donkey to the market. And not like today where, everybody has a specific career. You might be a doctor, you might be a lawyer. If you're a salesman, you sell, face cream or Tupperware, right? And that's your business. But back in the day, you sold whatever you got. You found a guy who was selling gold, you bought gold and sold gold. You found a guy who was selling silver foil. I mean, they didn't have it, but if they did, you suddenly became a silver foil salesman. You hocked what you got. So one day, this guy loads up his donkey with, a giant, massive weight, filled of fragrant smelling roses. And as the donkey is wandering through the street and the smell of these flowers is wafting, and the look of these beautiful, the red, petals against the green leaves is so beautiful and stark on the donkey's back, countless people came up and pet the donkey, smiles on their faces. Donkey comes back, gets put back in the stable, turns to the horse, and he says, "Hey, Mr. Ed, how you doing?" He says, "You don't know, the people out there, my public, they love me. They can't get enough of me. Everyone's coming, they're petting me, they're feeding me." Everyone was saying, remarking, leaning in to take a beautiful whiff. You know what I smell like? I'm amazing, like heaven. I must be the most beloved animal on the face of this planet. All the other animals look on enviously. The next day, the owner loads up his donkey, and instead of loading him up with roses to go to the market, he packs in all of the garbage that he has for the last month that he needs to take to the dump. Of course, now the donkey smells worse than life itself, right? Only COVID patients would be able to stand next to him, right? The donkey is wandering down the street. Everyone's running away. As he walks down the street, they run. The donkey comes back to the stable on Tuesday afternoon, after walking with the garbage on his back and having everyone run in front of him, and he says, "You don't understand. I don't know if ever in the history of the world there was ever as powerful an animal as me. I just stepped onto a street and people went running. They couldn't bear it was so afraid of me. I must be the strongest animal alive. And all the animals are jealous." A fox happens to be passing by, and he starts laughing. And the donkey hears the laughter. He doesn't know who's laughing at him. He says, "Who dares to laugh at the mightiest of all animals?" And the fox pokes his head round. And he says, "Donkey, nobody loves you, and no one's afraid of you. Yesterday when you bragged, I left it alone. They loved you yesterday because you were carrying flowers, had nothing to do with you. And they ran from you today because you were carrying garbage and had nothing to do with you. You weren't feared and you weren't loved. It's just what you were carrying." Rabotai, I saw in this Ben Ish Chai something so marvelous. When you sit and talk to people, a lot of times we think that we're listening. And a lot of times we think that we're just engaging with people. But actually, first and foremost, we are judging them. Human psychologists, the human social interaction psychologists tell us that the amount of time it takes a human being to judge someone after they see them is, anyone know how many minutes, hours? Not even seconds. I think it's 7 or 8 milliseconds. You ever see someone give someone the up and down? You ever see that? Someone walks in. And it's funny. You have a guy looking at a girl like that, he's checking her out. You have a woman looking at another woman, she's checking out the outfit. Down to the shoes. Already decided, what she's like. How wealthy she is. How much taste she has. Now, you might look someone up and down and think, wow, they have great taste. When actually they have no taste. They have a personal shopper. So you're ascribing to that person something which is just something they're carrying. You see someone who's well-to-do. I remember once, there was a young man who asked me if I would introduce him to a very wealthy man in the community. So I asked, well, what is the introduction for? He says, I have a business and I really wanted to ask his perspective and, his advice and and, he's made so much money. I figured that he probably would be able to give me some good advice. I must tell you, I told him I would try, but I was lying through my teeth. I had no intention of trying. Why did I tell him I would try? I told him I would try so as not to speak Lashon Hara. But I knew that this guy had never built a company, had never made a good move in the business world in his life. He inherited all the money that he got, and he was burning through it faster than you can, right? He was an abject failure in business. And the last thing I wanted was for this young man to take seriously a single word of advice this man had to give him on his fledgling company. It would have been the greatest damage that I could have done to introduce the two people. But he looked at this guy, he's got the shoes, he's driving the car, he's got the house. He clearly knows what he's talking about in business. Amazing, right? Isn't that amazing? You walk into Tesla, you see a fellow lying on the floor. He's not the guy you want to talk to. He's a nobody. He's homeless. I see he's wearing the same clothes he was wearing yesterday. You know who that is on the floor of the production line? That's Elon Musk, who slept here because they didn't meet their quota. And he realized he needed to watch every aspect of the production line himself. You understand? The guy lying on the floor he looks like don't, that's what the Mishnah is teaching us. Hagasli bo behora'ah. If you're arrogant in your judgment, you're a fool, you're wicked, and you're arrogant. If you rush to judgment, if you're not willing to take time and wait. So I always thought, the first one and the last one I get. You're an idiot, okay? You're stupid. For thinking that you understand someone, you're a fool. I also understand that you're arrogant. But I'm a rasha because I misjudged someone? Why does that make me evil? What do you think? Why am I evil for rushing to judge somebody? Anyone?
It's very hard to say because honestly, we're built to assume and judge. All of us made that way since we were little. So how is it that you're evil? I have no idea.
Right? Doesn't make sense. Also, I would imagine that evil, they say evil is as evil does. It's here. Does it matter? If I thought that you were silly or stupid or had an IQ, if I thought that, does that make me evil? Does that damage you that I think that? No, it lives here. The answer is, of course it does. Of course it matters what I think about you. Maybe sometimes the reason why it matters is because I can hurt you. So an opportunity comes my way to be able to suggest, and I refuse to do so because I have a low opinion of you. I can hurt you. I can hurt a person by torpedoing a shidduch. I could hurt a person by not making an introduction, right? So I can actually do damage based on the judgment that I've made. I can make a comment based on the way that I see things that causes other people to be, you know what a position a rabbi sometimes can be in? Someone will come to you and say, Rabbi, you know, this and this is going on. Do you think there's still a chance? You know, do you think my marriage, my relationship can be salvaged? Do you think so? What if I say no? Holy cow. Every bit of pain, every bit of anguish, all the difficulties that children feel, you know, I tore that apart. Why? Not because of what I said. What I said happened because of something that happened before. Because I judged. Because I thought I knew. But the funny thing is, one way of causing damage and being evil with this arrogant snap judgment, I'm a good judge of character. Someone comes on a job interview and you wrote them off in the interview. I didn't have a good feeling. Well, what are you, what is that? You have some sort of superpower where you understand people because you didn't have a feeling? Did you do any research? Did you try? Did you talk through issues with them? Or did you not get a good vibe? What the heck does that even mean? You're gonna ruin someone's future because you think that you're the expert on vibes? Do you see how callous? When you say that, I don't know if I would. I just didn't get a good vibe. Gas ruach. That's gas libo b'hora'ah. My heart, you understand? But there's another element. Not when I hurt you because I damage your prospects with someone else, because I speak to someone else. But sometimes the worst thing you could do to someone, and the most evil element of your judgment upon them, has nothing to do with anybody else and has everything to do with that person themselves. I'll share with you one example of this, okay? Just one example. There was a young man who asked me a little while ago, right when I moved from London to New York City. So he called me up and he said, "Look, I know you're moving to New York City, and I know that you know a lot of people. You're gonna know a lot of people out there." He says, "I'm thinking of moving from London to New York." Okay, I said, "Okay, I hear. You know, I can't blame you. I've done the same, right? I hear." He says, "I want you to do me a favor." He says, "I want you to be really honest with me. Do you think I could make it work?" There's something that happens. I don't know if you've ever felt it when someone asks you advice. Have you ever felt that? Someone comes and like, "I really need your advice." Do you ever feel that, the rising feel of importance? You're like, "Come, Baba, sit at my feet." Right? Let me enlighten you with my wisdom. Right? You know, someone's asking you for advice. On some level, that fills a person with a feeling of importance. But that feeling of importance can be so poisonous because you don't wait long enough. You don't hesitate enough to be able to give it the proper thought. Now, if you can't give someone advice, Rabotai, don't. If you're in a rush and someone says to you, "Can I ask you a quick question?" Happens all the time. "Rabbi, can I ask you a quick question?" Quick question? Sure. What's your quick question? The one thing I know when someone says quick, that's the one thing I know when someone says quick, is that's not good. I still remember once, I invited a family to my house for Shabbat. And the father, I think I mentioned this to you once before, and the father was one of the highest lawyers in England. They call them QCs, Queen's Counsel. He was a lawyer, he was a judge. He wasn't religious, his kid was getting more involved. Anyway, we come to the Shabbat table. I've never met them before, I know only the son, but I invited the family. They come, I have them sitting right opposite me. I make the kiddush, I wash, I cut the challah. As I cut the challah, before I even have a piece of challah in my mouth, he leans in and says, so why do you think God did the Holocaust? I was like, will you have some hummus with that? No, I didn't say that, but like, you were like leaning across the challah, like we don't even know each other. It's amazing, I think he thought like, he was cross-examining, the witness. I don't know what he thought he was doing exactly, but amazing, right? Quick question, Rabbi. If you don't have time to answer, if you don't have patience to answer, don't answer. You're not going to get involved in the nitty-gritty. You're not going to ask, what kind of therapy the family is going for. You're not going to find out about the kid in question. You're not going to ask about the husband or the boyfriend or the girlfriend. You're not going to make some phone calls. Don't answer. I think that's what the Mishnah is communicating to us here. Every judge has an obligation to be a judge, providing that he's not going to rush through it. If you're not going to give it the time, give them the courtesy of telling them, I'm not taking this seriously enough, don't ask me. Or, this is too big for me, I don't know what to tell you. I know someone who maybe you can speak to, but I can't. Or maybe I am capable, but I don't have the time, or the head, or the heart, or the emotional space to be able to take this on now. If you don't say that, you're a rasha. You see what the Mishnah is teaching us here? I love this idea that sometimes you're a rasha because you smacked an old lady in the head with a rolling pin and stole her pocketbook. And sometimes you're a rasha because you gave advice. Yeah.
Do you think that could also come across as arrogant? Like, I don't have the time for this, or I don't want to open myself up to try to even listen or whatever it is? Like, this is not for me.
That's a great question. It's a great question. You know what the answer to me is? You know what the answer I feel is? There's an entire spectrum. Let me kind of move you across the sliding dial here for 1 second, okay? Is it arrogant to say I don't have the time? Because effectively you're saying this is not worth my time. That's really what you're saying, right? Answer number one, maybe it isn't worth their time. Not because you're not valuable, but because I have a job, or I have a family, or I've had people call me for like Shalom Bayit questions at 1 o'clock in the morning. Rabbi, just 2 minutes of your time and not let me off the phone for 2 hours. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, I don't understand. You see what I'm saying? What we're learning from this Mishnah, I think, on the one hand is, we want you, if you can engage, to engage. But if you can't engage because you have other stuff on your plate, don't. So answer number one is, no, it's not arrogant, it's realistic. Answer number two is, what if it's not your job and you just can't be bothered? Still not arrogant, still realistic. Yeah? You might have some soul searching to do, because at the end of the day, whatever the reason why you're not giving it the time of day, bottom line, you're going to be a bad judge here. Bottom line, having you on board this case is a disaster, okay? Now, I want to share like something that I feel is a very powerful kind of correlation to this mashal of the Ben Ish Chai. I'll give you an example of a case that happened a little while back as well. I love to use the realistic cases because, you know, I still remember this incident. There was a guy and girl and they were going out and, you know, everything was going really well. Okay? Everything was going really well. Anyway, she comes to me and she says, listen, I have some real concerns. I said, what are the concerns? She says, look, the guy, every time we go out, like, he lets me order whatever I want, but almost invariably, I just noticed, I paid attention, he always chooses the cheapest thing on the menu, like the cheapest lunch or breakfast, that's what he's ordering. And she said, and I don't blame her for this, you know, I want to know, am I marrying someone who's a cheapskate? Am I marrying someone that for the rest of my life, everything I spend on the card is going to be challenged? You know, every time we want to do anything, it's going to be too much money. Like, is he just like letting me order what I want to like woo me in? And then I said, is it only food? Maybe he's just not a foodie, so he doesn't think it's an important expenditure. She said, what do you mean? I said, I know people who are very wealthy, who spend no money on clothing. They don't buy a pocketbook for $25,000, even though they can. And if you want to know if they're stingy, no. They blow 20, 30, 50, hundreds of thousands of dollars on these unbelievable vacations, going to the Grand Canyon and going to Israel and taking the whole family. For them, travel and family time is very important, and they're happy to spend everything on it. They're just a family that doesn't they don't mind buying like everything that they own is from, you know, Kmart. They don't, you know, if it works, it covers the important parts of the body. You know, it's a functional item of clothing. So I said to her, is it only food? She said, no, it's not only food. So my gut reaction at the time was, okay, maybe if you're seeing a pattern, maybe, you know, he is a person who doesn't like to spend money. Is that a reason to break something off? No, but you're asking me a question as to whether or not this points to a certain proclivity or midah. You know, maybe it does. I said, but give me a few days. Is it imminent? Is are you deciding today or tomorrow whether or not to say, you know? She said, no, it's fine. I said, give me a few days. Anyway, I did some inquiries. This is one of those beautiful stories that's it's tinged with, it's so beautiful and it's so sad. Turns out, this fellow's mother had a pre-existing condition that wasn't covered by insurance. As the most devoted son in the world, this guy was spending every dollar he earned on buying his mother, on paying for his mother's medication. So he needs to marry someone, so he wants to show them a nice time. He'll spend whatever she wants on the menu. But yeah, he's going to order the cheapest food and the cheapest whatever and the cheapest. But it's because he's the most giving heart in the world. What if I hadn't waited? What if I hadn't waited? What if I hadn't asked? What if I only asked the one person and not the second person that they told me to ask instead? What if? Shoteh, you're an idiot. Rasha, a wicked person. Vegas ruach, and you're arrogant. You're looking at the roses, you know, and calling the donkey, fragrant. You're looking at the garbage, you know, the bad midah, and not recognizing that the opposite. It's just something that the donkey's carrying. So let's move for 1 second back to the first part of the Mishnah. And I want you to tell me if this is something that you're doing, and maybe we could come up together with a couple of different exercises for how we could flip the script on how we can behave a little bit differently on this, okay? The Mishnah says, "Hachosech atzmo min adin," if you refrain from being a judge, porek mimenu eva v'gezel shuat shav. You decide not to be somebody who's going to judge. You're not going to, offer your opinion. You stop. Eva gezel shvuat shav. Only this week, someone called me to ask me a question about how to deal with a question of shalom bayit, and she said maybe one of the nicest things I've ever heard in my life about these difficult calls. Music to my ears. She says, Rabbi, what should I do? And before I could answer, she says, and don't worry. Whatever I do afterwards, I know that that's going to be my decision. I know that it's not going to be your fault. I'm not going to come back to you afterwards and say, you said, and you invite. What is that? Music to my ears. Oh my gosh. Right? The Mishnah is telling you, you stop people being upset at you because you got it wrong. You stop people stealing from one another, from swearing, from forcing them into positions that they don't need to be in. But if you have the ability to help, if you have the ability to be a judge, you must. I feel like, there's a magnificent story. David HaMelech says, as the judge of the Jewish people, Gal enai ve'abita niflaot mitoratecha. David prayed to Hashem. He said, please God, open up my eyes and let me see wonders in your Torah. And our Chachamim explain that sometimes wisdom in life is not pushed away from us because the wisdom isn't there. Not the learning opportunities aren't there. The problem that we have in not learning life's lessons is that we're refusing to open our eyes. And look at how interesting this is, that David HaMelech is asking for God's help to do something as simple as open his eyes. Even that is a big beracha. It's a big beracha for a person to feel, to have their eyes open, to be willing to learn, to be willing to be wrong. The grandfather of the Ben Ish Chai, he gave over a beautiful mashal. Maybe it was the Ben Ish Chai, so I don't remember exactly. But he gave over an amazing story, a tragic story, a story I think that embodies so many of us. There was a young woman. She had a beautiful ring she got for a present from her husband, and she lived next door to the neighbor. And the neighbor every day saw this beautiful ring, studded with diamonds, magnificent, bought by her next door neighbor. She didn't have anything, and the more she thought about it, all she could think about was this beautiful piece of jewelry. Thinking about what she didn't have and what her neighbor had. Okay? It consumed her. Till one day, she couldn't hold herself back anymore. The neighbor comes over, they're hanging out. She says, it's such a beautiful ring. She says, I've never seen anything that beautiful. Your husband must really love you. Yeah, she's buttering her up. The woman says, yes. She says, would you mind if I saw that ring? I'd love to say, never had anything like that in my life. Would you mind if I tried it on? The woman says, sure. Takes off the ring. She gives it to her neighbor. The neighbor puts the ring on. She's admiring it from all sides. Right? The next door neighbor is looking on with so much joy, pride in her heart. This person is. Lady takes off the ring, sticks it in her pocket, and starts walking away. The woman says, excuse me, give me my ring back. She turns around and says, what do you mean your ring? This is my ring. I bought this today. It's brand new. The woman said, you just asked me to try it on. How could you be so brazen as to lie directly to my face? The woman says, I don't know what you're talking about. This is my ring. Maybe you should just be happy with your lot in life and not always be looking at what other people have. The woman's like, are you kidding me right now? She said, give me back my ring. The woman says, this is not your ring, and if you want to, contest it, you're going to have to take me to court. But, I'm not giving up my ring just because you say it's yours. The woman's tearing her hair out. She's beside herself. She says, okay, so let's go to court. The woman says, well, you know what? I would go. She says, but look at the clothing I'm wearing. It's just also, I feel embarrassed to be shown in public wearing these clothes. The woman is like losing her mind. Her next door neighbor, she says, okay, you need clothes to go to court? Come to my house. I'll give you some clothes. We'll go to the court and settle this one. She takes her to the house. The woman sits there checking out. They're going through the closet. She picks an outfit. She puts it on. She says, okay, can we go now? The woman says, a little bit stronger than she is, she says, I would walk, but, it's very far. It's very far. She says, well, we can ride there if that will, take one of the horses. We'll ride together. We can finish this in a matter of hours. They go to the stable. She chooses a horse. She rides into town. Beautiful clothing. Beautiful horse. She pulls up in front of the Beit Din. They get out. The two of them walk in. As she walks in, she reaches into her purse. She takes out the magnificent ring, puts it on her finger, and walks into the court with her, her head up in the air, nose upturned to the world. The woman says to the Beit Din, she says, this woman is a thief. She stole my ring. And the thief turns to the Beit Din. And the woman says, this woman is out of her mind. Next thing you know, she's going to say that my clothes are also hers. The woman says, your clothes are mine. She says, you see what I'm dealing with? Next thing she's going to say is that my horse outside is also hers. She says, the horse is also mine. The Beit Din, the judge bangs his gavel on the table and says, get this because it's ridiculous. Get this case out. She says, the ring is yours. Now, I remember reading the story and I was so frustrated. It's just the mashal, but I was so frustrated. I just wanted to punch somebody. Do you ever feel that, right? Just the injustice of it all. But unfortunately, life works like that. Life works like that. People who are in privileged situations, who are at the top of society's food chain, that sometimes they can get wealthy off of. And again, I'm not making a political commentary here, but some of that is definitely, there's an emet to it. You could get rich on the back of somebody, you could do well on the back of somebody, and then say to the person who got you to that place, what do you mean? What, do you think all of this is yours? Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Sometimes the situation piles on one thing after the next, and eventually there's too many indicators that actually I'm right. Not only am I right because of this, but I'm right because of that, and I'm right because of that, and a person is not actually engaging. Rabotai, the scariest part of this Mishnah is not when you judge someone and you hurt them by talking to someone. It's not when you judge someone and you hurt them because now they see themselves through your opinion. The scariest part for me about this Mishnah is when a person is hasty to judge themselves. So what does that mean? What does that mean? All these ideas in the Mishnah about not removing yourself from the Beit Din, not pulling yourself out, but also not pulling yourself off of the case, but also not being too quick to rush the case. Let's talk through your average person in our community today. There's a famous story that they tell, again, apocryphal, about a woman who comes into class in teaching a group of kids in a public school. She walks in on the first day, she's given this unruly class, she settles them down, she starts to teach them, she rewards them, and as time goes on, the kids get better and better, and the scores go up and up and up and up. By the end of the year, The woman comes into the principal. She says, look, I'm here for my end of year review. I've taught the kids for 1 year. How do you think I did? And the principal says, how do I think you did? You're a miracle worker. Like, these are the worst kids that we have in the whole school. We've never been able to have anyone deal with them properly. Not only did you get them to settle down, but you got them to study. You raised their grades. How is that even possible? I always loved this story. And the teacher says, what do you mean, how's that possible? You know, I had a lot to work with. The principal says, what do you mean? She says, well, I walked in the first day and I noticed on the table you had given me a list of each one of the students, and next to it you'd listed, you know, their IQ, their ability to think. And I looked down at this list and I was amazed. You know, 130, 140, you know, 128, okay, 150, crazy. IQs like that, I realized I better stretch these kids. You know, of course they're unruly because probably nobody's challenged them before. And the principal's mouth is hanging open. And he says, IQ, those were their locker numbers. I always loved that story. What if irrelevant facts was seen actually as being relevant to a person's success? So what do I mean? You and I, when we look at ourselves and when we judge ourselves, so what do we see? If we're trying to take on a new challenge, what do we see? If someone offered me right now, Rabbi, we would like to make you the chief rabbi of Israel. No one's offering me that job, don't worry. Not happening. But if they did, what would be the first voice in my head? You don't know enough. You're not righteous enough. Chief, what do you think? You're some guy. And the voices start. And it's funny, because it doesn't need to be something that's that big. It just needs to be, it doesn't need to be objectively big. It just needs to be big in your own eyes. The other day I was talking with someone who thought, like, you know what an unattainable goal was? Having a healthy relationship with his kids. It was such an unattainable thing for him. Like, me, I'm never home, I'm very obsessed with my business. Something which for me and you might be the most natural thing in the world to think that you'd want to have. It was unattainable. Why? Look, Rabbi, I wouldn't know what to say. I'm focused on myself. End of the day, that kid's crying. I'm not getting out of bed. I'm not changing any diapers. It's just not for me. Kids are not for me, Rabbi. Yeah? The first thing that happens when you are faced by anything that's out of your comfort zone in life is the voices begin, and the voices will tell you all the reasons why you can't do it. You don't know, you don't have the expertise. But the funny thing is, I think that's the protagonist of our Mishnah. That's a gasli bo behora'ah. You were too quick to judge yourself. And actually, all of those things that you listed as real negatives in your life, almost always, not always, but almost always, those are things that are actually incredible positives if you took the time to see them another way. So as an example, that person who's incredibly dedicated to his business, I could never be a dad. Are you joking? When your business was failing, you slept on the floor of the production room. When your business was failing, you stopped spending money on yourself and poured every additional penny you could back into the business. I don't see only a person who's obsessed with their business. I see a person who's focused enough to get what is important to them done. That's what I see. I see a person who can, when the time is right, pull back on the reins of treating themselves to luxury because of something that they feel is a higher purpose. That's what I see. Don't you think those are valuable things to create a good parent? That's what happens when a person is gas libo, when they're too quick. Take your time. We've learned this Mishnah right in the beginning of Pirke Abot, where the Mishnah teaches us. It says, Hevu mitunim badin. Be patient in judgment. So, can I ask, if we were designed to judge, if we were designed to judge in milliseconds, right? That's what we said earlier. If that's how we are created, how can someone reverse this? How can you reverse it that when you hear a news story, your first reaction is not, oh, that's terrible, worse people, worse family, you know? I'm guilty of the same thing. The other day, there was a terrible story. It's all over the news. You guys have seen it. A wedding with 7,000 people. My first reaction, I read the newspaper. I read it not on the newspaper. Who reads the newspapers anymore? I read it on online, Yeshiva World News. And I held my breath. Held my breath, hoping against hope that the story wouldn't make its way into mainstream media. Of course it did. Of course it was in the New York Post. And what did they do? They gave him a $15,000 fine. That's not enough, in my opinion.
How is it true, though, that 7,000 people during this would go to a wedding? I don't believe that that's... They have no masks.
No masks. Yeah, in a room. If I tell you, like sardines.
Yeah, it was like, they had pictures, each one.
So I read this article, and I'm filled with Sinat Israel. Is that not what you're filled with? Anger? Judgment? Is that not what yeah? And then I read the last line of the article. And the last line of the article changed my opinion. Huh?
What did you say? Was it a year ago?
No. That would be amazing, by the way. You know what the last line of the article was? Last line of the article was, and the Gabbai is the person who takes care of the shul, of that synagogue, the place where they had the 7,000 person wedding, the Gabbai recently passed away from corona. You all with me? I'm not sure if your silence is because you don't understand or because you're flabbergasted. So that was the line. And that changed my opinion.
Why?
Come on. Someone think. They don't care? That should take my opinion even worse. You asked a very good question. Not how could they break the law? Why would they do that? Never mind whether or not they care about what the non-Jews think. Never mind whether they care about breaking the law. Why would they do that to themselves? I mean, we're sitting here in this room, and I'm the only one not wearing a mask because I'm speaking and there's no one within 12 feet in front of me except for this camera. And you can't catch, at least according to the CDC's opinion right now, you can't catch corona through a screen. They may change that at any moment. Okay? But here we are. Look how we spread out and everyone's wearing a mask. And it's not underneath your nose and it's not on your head or in your chin. Like you see something. Everyone's wearing a proper mask. Could you imagine what could possibly be? You know what the answer is? And this changed my opinion. And this is maybe the patience in judgment. Not every stupid thing somebody does is bad. sometimes it's just stupid. Let me reiterate that. Not every stupid thing that somebody does is bad. Sometimes it's just stupid. When I read that shul's gabbai died from corona, and the same shul and the same people are gathering, what do you know unequivocally about the people in that room? Ignorant. Now, stupid sounds harsh. I probably still would go with stupid. You know why? Because I don't think ignorant would get me out of anger.
I think they don't care.
Now, hold on. I don't think that they don't care. I think they don't believe. I think they don't believe in it. You know why? This is a perfect storm. Every 5 minutes they change the guidelines. Every 5 minutes they change what gets you sick. Right? Lots of people have had it and not had any symptoms. Yeah? People who have people in their own home who were sick from it, all on top of them for 3 weeks, and they didn't catch it. Without masks, eating the same food. Not just asymptomatic, symptomatic. I had corona in the beginning of March, right? I have people in my home, most of us got it, not everyone did. So you're gonna tell this guy, you have to wear a mask, and you can't be 6 feet within, you're like, what's 6 feet? I was on top of 4 other people that had it, coughed on my face. Clearly, you don't know how this spreads, and actually, this is not something that is... Now, what happens? Then they read an article in the newspaper about how Corona's gonna be over on November 4th. And it's just politically motivated, right? Then they read another article saying that actually, sunlight kills it. Then they read another article. Now, how do you know, in an age of misinformation, how do you choose what you believe? Oftentimes, like this Mishnah is telling us, we decide what we want to believe before we read anything. So I want to have a wedding with 7,000 people indoors. That's what I'm going to do. Does this resonate? Does this resonate? Because forget them for a second. Is there nothing in your life that you know is bad? Bad. But you do it, you just do it?
But just during a moment where you say, how does someone else see this? And you don't, like the whole wedding thing. It's like, how do you say that there's no one with a camera that's going to take a picture? Where the bigger ones?
I think that was naive. I think that was naive. I'll tell you part of the reason why. Most of those people don't have cell phones. Most of the people in that room. Also, it's not like you're going to get reporters wandering in. It was very strictly controlled. In the picture that you see, it's just a sea of Hasidic garb.
I know, but you just had the funeral like in March.
The funeral was outdoors and other people took pictures. Here, they figured everyone inside is their own. And by the way, it might very well be that the person who did snap the picture actually had no intention of sending it out, but sent it to one person, who then sent it to 2 family members, who then sent it to, their best friend, who then someone in their family saw it online. Yeah? It's hard to know. But is it someone's fault that they don't believe it? It's not. It's not their fault. I would wish that they were not as ignorant. I would be very angrily call that person a stupid person for not having the wisdom to be able to critically think and to think outside the box and not be influenced and, read around a little bit and don't get their news only from what. I would be worked up about it, but at the end of the day, I would understand it. Like, how many things are cultural truths? For how long did the roles of men and women, how long were they the way that they were just because they were the way that they were. How long was it in the religious community where you had people who just didn't want to sit and learn, but felt like they couldn't leave the yeshiva because that would be a bad thing? To go to work is a bad thing. You're a failure of a person because you left yeshiva learning for your whole life. There's a cultural truth. That's what they grew up with. You see what I mean? So sometimes the opportunity to be patient in judgment is not to understand that actually they're right, actually they're good. Actually, sometimes being patient in judgment is not about justifying the incorrect position. It's mitigating the harshness with which you see the situation. You see a guy who's desperate, who's yelling at his wife at home. Is there any excuse for that? No. Then you find out the guy who just went bankrupt, and the guy is just, and his best friend died from corona, and again, he's not a better person because he yelled at his wife now. It's just like there's a modicum of understanding the headspace the person was in when they made a bad decision. Yeah? So if we were designed to judge in a millisecond, how do we stop that? I formulated a question that I've asked myself in situations where I need to pass some level of judgment. Tell me if this is a beneficial question, and then maybe I'd like to open it to you guys for a couple of minutes. Tell me, how do you think we could change this dynamic? Okay? I've started to ask myself, is that the only possible interpretation? Yeah? You see someone, you think, is that the only possible interpretation? You have a coworker. They're always angry, bitter, negative, cynical. You have a coworker, they're always lazy, never getting a job done. So you brand the person lazy. Maybe they're not a lazy person. Maybe they hate their job. So they have no motivation. So you look at it, it looks like lazy. You look at it, it looks like cynical. It looks like negative. Is that the only possible interpretation? Maybe swap the word negative or cynical with frustrated. Maybe swap the word lazy with feeling underappreciated or actually not motivated to do this job at all. You see what I'm going with it? Is that the only possible interpretation? And the benefit of asking that question is that the other side of the possibility doesn't need to be right. It just needs to be possible. And it doesn't even need to be 100% possible. It could be 20%. Like, yeah, now the guy, he still screamed at his wife. But hold up. The guy doesn't feel like a human being. Yeah, the guy is really angry at the world right now. So a lot of times we take out our baggage, our garbage on the people that we love the most because we feel the most secure in hitting them because I don't mean literally, because we know they won't leave us. So guy lost his friend, he's feeling that the bite of mortality, he's feeling that feeling of loneliness that now he has because he doesn't have his best friend in the world with him. So he's putting that out on his wife. Again, not justified, but maybe better understood. 20%? Sorry? Reframing. It's completely reframing. 100%. It's reframing. So the Mishnah, Rabbi Yishmael is telling us, if you pull yourself out of ever judging somebody, you won't have any of these problems of anger and stealing and shvuat shav, where the person needs to swear to reinforce their position. You don't have any of that. On the other hand, if you can help and you didn't, what a terrible person you are. Some people can help with money, and some people can help with kindness, and some people can help with advice. And then the Mishnah carries on and says, and if you're gonna get involved, give it the time, don't be too hasty. So the Mishnah is kind of almost encouraging us, that when we can, to get involved and to do it in a proper way, to give it that extra pause. So maybe, someone said to me the other day, they said, you know what my tool is whenever I feel like I'm judging someone? I ask, what would I want people to say about me if that was me? I didn't like that one. You know why? Because it's not you. It's not you. And usually what you'll do is you'll just kind of like you ever been someone's like, oh, he's dishonest. Well, you want people to say you were dishonest? And then the person says, well, yeah, if I did what he did, yeah, then I would want, when people do that, right? You can't. It's too hard to switch places to be that empathic. So, do we have any other suggestions? What do you guys think?
The book My Father, My King is the judge's favorite, and it's an idea that as you judge, so shall you be judged. So that in mind sometimes is our sense of how I was looking at another, then understand that Hashem is aware of where I'm at with it, and I will then be possible.
So one way you're saying to kind of calm the boiling water is to say to yourself, the way I'm judging them is the way heaven is going to judge me. So that gives you pause. Yeah, that's what you're saying. Okay.
We don't help ourselves sometimes how we behave. We just like ourselves as human beings. I said, well, that's okay if I do it. You do, that whole projection area. But yeah, it makes you pause and say, maybe I don't want to be judged harshly. Maybe this person also, if they had to be, like you said, there's another. I love what you say there. Is that the only possible interpretation? So it kind of goes in alignment.
Okay, all right, I like that. Anyone else? Yeah, you going to say something?
I was just going to say that for me, it's easier to give someone the benefit of the doubt so you don't know the full picture. If it doesn't hit you personally, I think sometimes when family members say certain things or act certain ways to you, to me, it's the immediate feelings of emotion. Where if it's someone work or a friend or this and that, you can say, well, you don't know, and it's easier to kind of give them that.
So it's only natural that it's going to be easier to judge someone favorably when it didn't happen to you, right? That's quite.
Like a little bit removed.
There's some space. So if I'm not the one that got the hurt directly, it's easier for me to say, oh no, maybe, come up with those scenarios. But what I always found interesting is if you could come up with those scenarios and you're one step removed, that it's not factually correct to say that it's any less likely because it happened to me. It's just that I recognize that the emotion is there, One of the things as well, I heard one other piece of advice that I thought was really worth sharing. Anyone else have any other solutions or things or tools that they use when they want to judge or they're ready to judge or they are judging someone?
Maybe to be in the situation of that person, I think, if I be in that situation, I should be more careful.
So you put yourself in their shoes. If that had happened to me, what would my reaction be?
Because you can't judge, because everyone is in different positions.
So what's it called? I like that a lot. You know what the piece of advice this person gave me was? I thought this was really nice. He said, whenever I find that I'm judging or sizing someone up in that way, and specifically to your point, was they were angry or hurt, and this is now I have to think about the way I feel about this person, and now how I'm going to tell other people about that person. He said, I think, am I in a position, am I fit to judge right now? Like if I'm angry, probably I'm not, I can't think clearly. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Like, have you ever been in a situation where maybe in a relationship or maybe, at work where you're very upset about someone says, well, what do you think? And you're like, you know what, I'm too upset right now. to deal with this. I'm afraid of what I might say. Right? You ever do that? Now, when do you do that? When the stakes are really high and you know that if you make a mistake, you're not going to walk that back so easily. So when I know that my personal cost is high enough, what do? I just yank myself off the bench. You know, like they used to have in the old times on the Broadway plays. They had that long hook. They just grab the guy and yank him off the stage. Sometimes you can do that to yourself, especially when you know you're in a state of anger or you're upset about something, where you could basically almost say to yourself, like, you know, I have no business in this state of mind offering an opinion about this, right? You know, there was a case that came before one of the great poskim, and the court case was over an inheritance. And you know, the person's father had passed away, and he inherited this house, and the creditor was coming, and he was claiming that, you know, the money that he owed money, and and you know, and he wanted to force him to sell the house. And the rabbi said, "I'm really sorry, I can't rule on this case. You have to bring it to another bet din." And the parties, both of them said, "Rabbi, you're the biggest posek in the tri-state area. We came to ask you. We want your ruling on the case." And the rabbi said, "I'm sorry, I can't rule on the case." He said, "I'm still in the year for my father, and I know that my natural inclination is going to be to protect the guy whose father just passed away, because I feel this immediate kindredship." You know, you speak to people who are saying Kaddish, they feel like a connection with everyone else in the shul that's saying Kaddish, right? He says, I don't know that I'll be able to be an efficient and an accurate and a fair and impartial judge in this case. So I'm taking myself out. Now, I don't know that he actually would have ruled incorrectly. I don't know that he actually would have, you know, sided with him maliciously against the law. But what this posek was saying is that I know that there are elements of bias within ourselves that we're not actually even sometimes aware of. It's so coded in, you know, to your psyche that, you know what? My rabbi taught us something a long time ago. He said, you know, and I think in some ways, you know, as Jews, we share it a little bit. In some instances, we share it with the black community of today, you know? My rabbi said, he said, you know, there's a lot, if you go to Israel, there's a lot of dishonesty, unfortunately, with the law. You know, in fact, he quoted this crazy example where he said that people underreported, the government overstated the taxes for small businesses in Israel at the time. Why? Because they knew that most people who were reporting on small businesses were underreporting. So they overstated the tax obligation. So on paper, if you're reporting everything, you can't survive as a small business owner. But they wrote a higher number on taxation so that when people underreport, that higher bracket will actually make up for the difference. They'll be able to survive and the government will get what they felt was a fair share of the tax dollars. So someone asked my rabbi in the class that we were learning, they're like, how could that be that this is going on here in the state of Israel? We're Jews, aren't we supposed to be honest? Shouldn't the government be built on honesty, the laws? Shouldn't the people be honest in their reporting? And my rabbi said something that was piercing. He says, you have a people who for 2,000 years have had to fight and scheme and lie to stay alive. In Russia and in Poland and in Syria and in Iraq and Iran, the government was always killing you and stealing your money and taking your daughters. And this was what was going on throughout much of Jewish history. Authority for us was almost always a very bad thing. So it's built into the psyche not to trust or tell the truth to authorities. And then what happened, he said? And then we moved into a country where we were the authorities. Inborn habits, he said, die hard. and they don't go away so quickly. First of all, what a beautiful way of judging people favorably. But there's a deep truth in that. You know, the distrust in the Hasidic community of the police, of the government, you know, they came here directly. You know, the Hasidus of Ger, the whole Hasidut was wiped out in the Holocaust. Hundreds of thousands of people, all murdered. They have an inborn, like when they call police Nazis, they're not just saying it because they feel like the police are Nazis. Like their interpretation of authority, that's been their life experience. Like almost all of these people will have a family that the whole family was wiped out, you know, in the Holocaust. There is a correlation. And when you hear these people in Israel calling Israeli soldiers Nazis, why do you think they're doing that? Because the last time they had an interaction with a uniform, that's what it was. Now, it's not to justify, as we said 100 times already, it's not correct, it's wrong, it's stupid, it's ignorant, all those things. But there's a modicum of understanding that we have to have when we get that these are still people who never really integrated here. You know? They're still wearing the hats that they wore in Russia in the winter, made out of fur, and they wear them in the summer. They chose to freeze their interaction, to create insular communities to protect their traditions. We don't agree with it, let's say, fine. But that's what they've chosen to do. And that is in some ways the reality that they live in. So when they get a Nazi zugen mir telling me to do this and to do that, like it's wrong, but you kind of understand it a little bit more. And the proof in the pudding is when one of their own, where the gabbai dies of it, and it still doesn't deter them, it teaches you that they're not lying when they say they think it's a hoax. They actually think it's a hoax, many of them. And the proof is, look, never mind what they're doing to others, they don't feel they need to protect themselves. Anyway, I think this Mishnah is a super interesting Mishnah and helps us kind of maybe change the way we interact with and talk to and advise others, but also in the way that we talk to and think about and speak to ourselves. It changes our self-talk. When we judge ourselves so harshly. Can't believe I did that. I'm such an idiot. I'm such a loser. I'm such a saboteur. No, you've been hurt before. No, cut yourself that slack. And when you do, then actually you have a more accurate picture of yourself. Maybe not justified, but perhaps better understood. Baruch Adonai Le'olam.